My parents sent me to work at McDonald's while they paid for my sister's college, but I found these documents, and my mother is pale. Something happened to me and my family recently, and I need a place to tell this, to get it off my chest. My family situation has always been complicated, but things got worse with what I bring you. I'm looking for people who can read my story and then give me some advice or something like that. When I grew up, I wouldn't say my family was rich, but we definitely lived without struggles. My parents had jobs, owned a house, and seemed to manage their expenses without issues, which was better than most families. From the outside, everything seemed fine, but inside, the story was different. I have a younger sister, who is what you'd call the golden child. She was the one who received praise for anything she did, for my parents diverting their attention to please her. Here, apparently, she could never be wrong. The relationship my parents had with me was different. It wasn't total neglect, but even a child could sense the favoritism. When I reached high school, I knew I had to think and plan for what would be of my life. I didn't expect my parents to pay for all my college, but I hoped they would at least help a little. I made a plan. I would apply for scholarships to cover most of the expenses and work part-time to contribute. Any help my parents could give me, I would treat as a loan and pay them back after I graduated and got a job. It seemed like a fair deal. However, when I brought this up with them, they rejected the idea immediately. They said they wouldn't contribute a single penny to my education. My father told me directly that if I wanted something, I'd have to work for it. He suggested I start working at McDonald's right away to save money. At first, I thought maybe they didn't understand my plan, and that the help would be just a loan, but I brought it up again a few weeks later. I even showed them the scholarships I was planning to apply for and explained how the remaining costs could be manageable with just a little help from them. But they understood perfectly. My mother said something like, "You're dreaming too big," and advised me to be more realistic. My father said that university wasn't for everyone and suggested I think about studying a trade or getting a full-time job after I graduated. It wasn't that they didn't have the money, because we weren't in a delicate situation. They just saw no reason to invest in me. Meanwhile, my sister, who was only a year younger than me, was treated completely differently. My parents paid for her dance classes, bought her a car when she turned 16, and even gave her an allowance for being responsible with school. I didn't get any of that, and I had to do odd jobs for neighbors to earn some money for my expenses. I followed my father's advice and got a part-time job at McDonald's. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. I worked afternoons and weekends while studying, trying to save as much as I could. It wasn't enough to cover university, but I kept telling myself it was a dignified job, and besides, it was teaching me about hard work. Things with my family only worsened after I graduated. My parents told me I could stay at home, but only if I paid rent. It wasn't a huge amount, but it felt like a slap in the face, considering everything they were still doing for my sister. At that point, she was about to graduate from high school, and it was clear that my parents had always planned her college future. They openly talked about her applications, took her on college visits, and even threw a big celebration when she was accepted into a private university. But here comes the problem. While I was busting my ass working to save for a dream they never supported, they were quietly saving to fully fund my sister's college education. They covered her tuition, books, housing, everything. One of the most impactful situations was when my car broke down. I needed it to get to work, but the repair cost was more than I could afford. I asked my parents for help, hoping they would at least lend me some money or let me skip paying rent for the month. But they told me they couldn't give me anything because they had just sent extra money to my sister for her living expenses. I had to take out a loan, which led to a spiral of debt for months. The resentment was eating me up inside, but I kept pushing through and focusing on saving. After a couple of years, I finally had enough to move out. I started looking for a place and found a small apartment I could afford on my own. When I told my parents I was leaving, they didn't seem to care. My mother only reminded me that I needed to take all my things before I left. And that's when everything changed. While packing a box at the back of a room that wasn't used, I found it full of old documents. Curiosity got the best of me, and I began going through them. As I went through the papers, I found a bank statement for a savings account for university in my name. The balance on the statement was almost $100,000. At first, I thought there had been some mistake. My parents had always made it clear there was no money for my education, but here was this account with my name on it, and it wasn't empty. Then, I saw the withdrawal history. The account had been completely emptied around the same time my sister started university. I felt nauseous. You didn't have to be a genius to figure out what had happened. My parents had saved that money for me at some point, but when the time came, they decided my sister's education was more important. I immediately talked to my mother about it. Her face turned pale when she saw the statement in my hands. She tried to make excuses, saying they had to use the money for household expenses, but the timeline didn't add up. It was clear they had used the money to pay for my sister's tuition. I didn't stay to hear the rest of her excuses. I finished packing my things and left that same night. Since then, I've talked to some friends about what to do. Some believe I should take legal action, since the account was technically in my name, but I'm not sure if it's worth the effort. Part of me just wants to move on and leave it behind, but another part feels I deserve justice for the way they treated me. Even now, I can't believe they were willing to sacrifice me to give my sister an advantage. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive them for this. Do you have any advice or suggestions on what I should do next? It's been a few days since I posted, and I've had time to calm down and think things through. First, I want to thank everyone who took the time to comment and give me advice. The vast majority of comments suggested that I consult a lawyer and that it wouldn't be a big deal, at least to get a professional opinion. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I at least needed to know where I stood legally. If they really used that account without my permission, I had the right to know if there was anything I could do about it. I didn't know what to do, but it only took me a couple of hours of research to find lawyers in my area. I finally found one who specializes in family law. I called the office, explained the basic aspects of my situation, and they offered me a free consultation. Free is the best word you can hear at a time like mine. So, I went to the office on the day of the consultation with the bank statement in my bag, which was my only evidence. I really liked the lawyer because he was patient and very professional. While he explained everything, I shared the whole story about how my parents treated me unequally, my part-time job at McDonald's, the fact that they refused to help me with college, even though I offered to pay them back, and how I discovered the account after all these years. Basically, I told the story of my first post. He looked at the bank statement and told me it was possible I had a case, especially if the account was legally in my name and my parents withdrew the money without my consent. What I liked most was that he didn't try to sell it to me as a sure thing. He explained to me that proving the unauthorized use of the funds could be complicated, especially if my parents tried to argue they used the money for household expenses or for my benefit. Even if I won the case, there was no guarantee I would recover the money, since my parents might not have it anymore. And then there was the cost. Legal battles aren't cheap, and I had to consider whether it was worth the time, money, and emotional energy it would take. I left the meeting with mixed feelings. On one hand, I was glad I took that step and gained insight into my options. On the other hand, the idea of dragging this out for months, or even years, is a bit intimidating. I still haven't decided if I'll move forward with the lawsuit, but I have time to think it over. In the meantime, I've been focusing on settling in and organizing my life. I recently moved out on my own, and it's a whole challenge. Finances are tight, but I'm managing. To make things a little easier, I got another part-time job. It's not my dream job, but it's flexible, and the pay is decent enough to cover the essentials. Between that and my shifts at McDonald's, my schedule has been full, which, in a way, has helped me stay busy and makes it easier not to think about everything that's happened. Every penny I earn brings me closer to a stable life. I've also been thinking about university. Although my plans were ruined back then, that dream has never disappeared. After everything I discovered with the account, I realized I couldn't let my parents' decisions define my future. If they don't want to invest in me, then I'll do it myself. I started researching options to go back to school part-time. I know it won't be easy, especially with work and my financial responsibilities, but it's not like I have many options in this field at the moment. I spent an entire night researching local community colleges and programs that offer online courses. There's a lot to consider, like how to pay for it, whether I'll be able to balance it with my jobs, and if I'll have time for the assignments. But that's life. I suppose I've also been reviewing financial aid options and scholarships. although they come with their own setbacks. As for my parents, I haven't spoken to them since I moved out. They know I know, but I don't want to confront them with all of this because I know they won't give me the money back. I know them well enough to know they'll never do that. So, for now, it's better to keep the possibility of suing them a secret so that when it happens, it'll be a surprise. I don't think they expect me to do anything, and that's what motivates me the most to sacrifice everything to sue them. Something curious happened recently. I received a text from my sister. It was short, vague, something about how she missed me and hoped I was doing well. I didn't reply. I don't know why she wrote to me. Could it be related to what I discovered? She almost never writes to me, so it was something very rare. After speaking again with the lawyer to clarify some doubts, I decided to send my parents a formal letter demanding they return the money. I've never been someone who likes confrontation, so this was a big step out of my comfort zone, but my lawyer made it more manageable. He helped me draft the letter so that it was professional, straightforward, and left no room for confusion. It's our first step, and if they don't accept it, we'll have to proceed with a formal lawsuit. We included all the details of the account, the withdrawals, and a clear demand for reimbursement. Once it was ready, I sent it and prepared for their reaction. I thought they would just ignore it, like a joke coming from me. That's something they could do, considering how they've treated me in the past. But, to my surprise, my father called me the next day. Seems it had an effect on them. From the very first second, he was furious. We can say he was taking my letter very seriously. He accused me of being ungrateful, which seems to be his favorite word lately. He started defending himself, saying how they did the best they could for me, and how I was being ungrateful for everything they did. If you're thinking about this right now, my father wanted to make me feel bad just for asking for my money. Not a single hint of remorse, not even a small acknowledgement of what they had done. Just pure defense and justifications in his speech. At least it didn't seem like he was accepting anything. My first instinct was to respond in the same tone or defend myself, but I remembered that arguing with him wouldn't be productive. I've spent years learning to stay calm in situations like this, and this time it paid off. I let him talk, and when he finished, I simply told him, "This isn't about gratitude or blame, it's about what's right, what's fair." But that last word, for my father, isn't one he likes, especially when it refers to him. He started yelling again, now openly insulting me, as if he weren't talking to his son. He was trying to intimidate me into letting everything go, so everything could go back to the way it was before. Well, it was already too late for that, and if anything, he was only making it worse. Later that night, I received a text from my mother. She asked if we could meet to talk. At least she seemed more open to dialogue, even seemed remorseful. This caught me off guard because she's usually the last person to admit when something is wrong. I thought about ignoring her, but my lawyer said I might need more proof for a lawsuit. So, I replied yes, and we agreed to meet at a cafe the next afternoon. Before you ask, my father didn't give me any proof, unless insults can count as such. When my mother arrived, she seemed more stressed than I'd seen her in years. She was trembling while holding her coffee. So, I knew this was hard for her, but I still didn't feel sorry for her. She immediately admitted they had used my university fund for my sister. According to her, they felt they had no other choice because they didn't want my sister to have to go into student loan debt. She kept talking about how hard it had been for them to make this decision, as they had to abandon one child to secure the future of the other, and then came the emotional manipulation. She said I was destroying the family by trying to recover the money, that I was being unfair to my sister, and that I needed to understand the difficult situation. This wasn't a joke. I let her talk while recording everything. I'm not sure if this will be useful as evidence, but at least it gave me some response. When she finally finished speaking, she looked at me, waiting for an answer, one that would say I'd forget everything. But I told her this wasn't something I could simply forget. They had a responsibility toward me, just as they did toward my sister, and they failed me. I told her I wasn't backing down, and if they couldn't return the money, I would move forward with legal action. The rest of the conversation was tense. She tried several times to convince me to let it go, using everything she could to avoid me being upset with her excuses. None of them were good enough or interesting enough to mention. In the end, she left, saying she needed to speak with my father before giving me an answer. At least this was something, because there was a possibility of recovering the money. In the following days, my sister started sending me text messages. Her texts were trying to make me feel guilty, saying that because of me, she could lose her chance to study, that I was being a bad brother just because I didn't have the opportunity to go to university, but she did. She was trying to defend my parents. It's normal. When they give you everything, they're the best parents. But when they made you work just to buy the things you needed for school, and now you try to recover the money, you're the bad one. Her messages were full of phrases like, "They're your parents too, how could you do this?" Whatever I replied, it seemed like she didn't understand or wasn't intending to. If I didn't tell her I was going to cancel everything, she wouldn't be happy. The last message I received from her was one where she called me selfish. I'm exhausted with all of this, which is why I had doubts about taking legal action against my parents. But with every interaction with them or my sister, it's like they give me more energy to do it. I'm still in contact with my lawyer because I want to know what to do if my parents continue to refuse to pay me. He's already explained how a potential trial would go, and I can already tell you that when I finished writing this update, something happened out of nowhere. My father sent me an email. It was long and full of apologies that I don't want to talk about here because it would just be more of the same. But at the end, he mentioned that they might be willing to pay me part of the money if I renounced the legal action. Well, it's the first sign that they're willing to give in. Of course, it seems like a half-hearted attempt, but it's better than I expected. I forwarded it to my lawyer and asked for his opinion. His response was clear. The partial payment wasn't enough. He also told me that if they're willing to negotiate with just a letter, it's because they're afraid of what could happen. He suggested I draft another letter with specific reimbursement terms, including a timeline and exact amounts. They wanted to send small amounts each month, but I want to need larger amounts, as this could be necessary to quit some of my part-time jobs and dedicate that time to studying. Now, I just need to write this new letter and see what their response is. The terms are far from what they proposed, but we'll see how close they get to what I'm asking. My parents didn't want to accept the conditions in my last letter, so here I am with another update, but now with my lawyer. We've taken a different approach. My lawyer, just like me, is determined to make my parents pay for every act of irresponsibility. This led us to discover even more fascinating things about my father and his level of favoritism. As part of the evidence-gathering process, my lawyer requested more detailed account statements to trace the timeline of withdrawals and spending from the university fund. When the documents arrived, I noticed something strange. There was a section showing the original source of the funds. It wasn't money my parents had saved for me. It was an inheritance from my grandparents. I never knew much about my grandparents because both passed away when I was very young, and my parents almost never talked about them. But they had left this money for me to use for my education. Did my grandparents know my parents wouldn't help me with this? I'll never be able to ask them. With this new information, my anger grew even more. My lawyer told me this strengthened my case, especially because the account was specifically designated for my education. My lawyer and I have been reviewing the withdrawals from my account to see where the money went. One of the large withdrawals almost exactly coincided with the beginning of my sister's university. Tuition, books, housing, everything. But there were many more. For several years, my parents made a series of withdrawals that can only be described as luxury expenses. The biggest one was a new SUV purchased right when my sister graduated from high school. And it wasn't just the SUV. There were smaller but equally unnecessary expenses. Vacations, home renovations, even a series of spa treatments my mother mentioned once in a casual conversation. It was all there, in black and white. One large withdrawal coincided almost exactly with her 16th birthday party, including the venue rental, catering, and decorations. Then there was the laptop she received for her birthday, expensive private lessons for her hobbies, and even what seemed to be a fund for study abroad programs. I spoke with my parents right after analyzing all this new information, and their responses didn't disappoint. This time, I already expected something like this. My father insisted they used the money for the family and that it was a good way to use it. My mother tried to justify the SUV purchase, for example, saying that she needed a reliable vehicle to take my sister everywhere. She even had the nerve to suggest that some of the home renovations were for me, even though my room wasn't renovated. But at this point, the excuses didn't matter. If they wanted to avoid legal action, they had to start taking it seriously. That was the warning.